The desert was not quiet at night. It whispered, it sighed, it creaked, and sometimes it screamed. The wind carried the sound of distant engines from the caravans that never stopped moving, the endless grind of commerce that kept the borderlands alive. Marek had grown used to it, the way a man gets used to a scar, aware of it in the back of his mind. But never really surprised anymore. That night, he had parked his survey truck near the skeleton of an old relay tower. He had been mapping erosion lines for the corporation, a job that paid poorly but kept him on the move, which was how he liked it. The corporations didn't care where he slept as long as the data was good. He liked being a speck on the map, out where only stars and sand judged him. He was rolling up a tarp when he heard the sound. Not a caravan engine, not the whistle of the wind. Something smaller, sharper, closer. A clink of metal. A faint whimper. At first he thought it was a dog. Feral packs lived on the edges of the settlements, and sometimes they wandered the flats. But when he shone his flashlight toward the sound, what it revealed froze him to the spot. There, hunched against a stake driven into the ground, was a figure. Small, thin, chained. She flinched at the light, shielding her face with bony arms. Her skin caught the beam strangely, pearl pale, iridescent, like the inside of a seashell. Her hair was wispy, almost translucent, clinging to her shoulders like fine threads of glass. The collar around her neck glowed faintly with embedded circuitry, and from it ran a length of chain bolted to the ground. Marek's throat went dry. It wasn't a dog. It wasn't human either. Her eyes reflected the light when she finally lowered her arms. Huge, luminous eyes, too large for her narrow face, glistening with tears. They fixed on him with a desperation that twisted something deep in his chest. "Please," she whispered. Her voice was cracked, brittle, but the words were in clear, if broken, English. "Please, buy me. Take me as yours." Marek blinked, certain he had misheard. "What?" "Slave," she said, the word trembling in her mouth like it hurt to say it. "I am for sale. Buy me, keep me. Do not let them take me back." He stared at her, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. She was small, her limbs delicate, her frame no larger than a human child's. But her face wasn't that of a child. There was a maturity in her expression, a weight that only suffering could carve. Marek swallowed. "Who did this to you?" She winced at the question, glancing toward the horizon. The orange glow of the nearest settlement flickered faintly in the distance, painting the night sky like a permanent wound. "The market," she said. "They sell us. Chains, collars, ledgers. I ran. They caught me. They chained me here until they come back." Her fingers touched the collar, and she hissed at the static spark it gave. Marek had heard whispers of such things. Slave markets on the edge of corporate law, auctions where debts were settled in flesh. He dismissed them as urban myths or as exaggerations told by activists. But now, seeing the collar's faint glow and the way her thin shoulders trembled, he felt the ugly reality sink into him like sand in his lungs. "I don't—" He stopped. The words in his throat felt too heavy. "Why me? Why ask me to—" "Because," she interrupted, her voice sharp with fear. "If you walk away, they will come back. They will cut me apart, use me for healing, for parts. I am commodity to them." She tugged at the chain, her small hands scraping against the dirt. You are a man with no caravan, no colors. You can hide me. If you buy me, I live." The word buy scraped his nerves raw. He hated it. The very thought of owning another being made bile rise in his throat. "That's not freedom," he said, shaking his head. Her luminous eyes narrowed, glittering with a wet, painful fire. "Freedom is not real here. Only less pain, less fear. Choose, man. Leave me to die or buy me to live." The desert seemed to grow colder around him. The wind rattled the skeleton tower, making the chain rattle in reply. Marek realized he was shaking. He wasn't a hero. He was a surveyor, a man who measured dirt and rock for men in suits who'd never walk it. He wasn't built for choices like this, but he couldn't look away from her. From the collar that dug into her fragile neck. From the way her shoulders curled inward like she was trying to make herself invisible. From the way her voice, broken and pleading, carried the weight of someone who had already learned that mercy was a rare and costly thing. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, as if names were dangerous. "Nira," she whispered finally. "They call me Asset Unit K-77, but my name is Nira." Marek crouched slowly, lowering the flashlight so it wasn't blinding her. His shadow fell long across the sand. "Nira," he repeated, the word foreign on his tongue. "I don't want to own you, but I also can't leave you here." She leaned forward, her chain clinking. "Then you must own me," she insisted. "On paper, in ledger." "Only way." Her hand reached out, small fingers trembling as they brushed against his boot. "Please." Marek's heart twisted. He wanted to say no. He wanted to tell her she was free, to break the collar and walk her away from all of it. But the way she said it, the certainty, the desperation, told him she knew more about the system than he did. If ownership was the only shield in this broken world, then maybe ownership was the beginning of rescue. He looked at the collar again, the embedded circuitry glimmering faintly. It wasn't just a restraint. It was a tag, a marker for the networked markets that stretched across the caravans. Cutting it off might set off alarms. Trying to free her without papers might only make things worse. Marek felt sick with the thought. But when he looked into her eyes again, luminous and trembling, he knew there was only one choice. "All right," he said hoarsely. "I'll buy you. I'll get you out of this." Nira's breath hitched, a sound caught between relief and disbelief. She sagged forward, the chain rattling as her weight pulled against it. "Thank you," she whispered, her forehead nearly touching the dirt. "Thank you." Marek stood, his hand shaking as he reached into his jacket for the comm scrambler. He'd have to contact someone he hated contacting, someone who owed him a favor, someone who could forge the papers. The thought made his skin crawl, but Nira's small figure, trembling and chained, made the decision for him. The desert around them was silent, except for the faint hum of the collar, the rasp of the wind, and the quiet sound of a girl trying not to cry. Marek lifted the comm, dialed the code he swore he'd never use again, and began the transaction that would make him, in the eyes of the law, a buyer of slaves. The comm scrambler buzzed faintly in Marek's hand, a low, almost pleading sound that seemed to echo Nira's own voice. He keyed in the frequency and waited. It wasn't long before a face appeared on the screen. Lena, a woman who had owed him favors for years in the shadow circuits of the borderland trade. Her expression was sharp, calculating. "You've got my attention," she said. "Why would a middleman like you reach out in the middle of the night?" Marek swallowed. "I need to buy something," he said carefully. "Legally. As in the ledger. I need a record of ownership, and I need it transferred. It's complicated." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Ownership? You're serious? What is it this time? Drone, rare mineral, or living commodity?" He paused. The last part tasted bitter in his mouth. "It's a living thing. An alien." Her eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. "You mean one of those Lyrian offshoots?" she asked, using the term the brokers favored to refer to certain rare sentient species. "The ones they put in the black markets. Those things aren't cheap." "You know that, right?" "I know," he said. He glanced at Nira, crouched behind the battered remains of a windscreen, eyes wide and luminous. She flinched slightly at the glow of the scrambler, but didn't move away. "I have to do it. She's alive." "If I don't—" Yeah, I get it," Lena said sharply. "Fine, I'll help. But you better have the creds. The market isn't a charity, Marek. They'll smell hesitation like blood in water." He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I have just enough. I'll transfer immediately." "Please, make sure it's secure. She cannot go back to them." Lena's lips pressed into a thin line. "You're crazy." "But fine, I'll work it. Give me the specs. Name, asset ID, location." He recited everything he knew, the designation from the collar, the coordinates of the desert stake, a description of her markings and her faint glow. She listened, tapping rapidly on a holographic interface that hovered between them, sending updates and pinging networks beyond the reach of ordinary law enforcement. By the time they finished, Marek's stomach ached. The transaction would not make Nira free. In fact, legally, she was now his property, an asset with all the paperwork to make that indisputable. But practically, it was the first step toward her survival, and for the moment, that was all he could hold on to. "Done," Lena said. "I've locked the transfer through multiple nodes. No one can trace her exact location back to you. At least not easily. Keep her low profile, Merrick. If the brokers sniff her trail, they'll come fast and with fire." He exhaled, relief and anxiety fighting in his chest. "Thank you," he said quietly. When the call ended, Marek turned to Nira. She stepped closer, hesitant, and let him kneel so they were eye level. "I bought you," he said. "It's messy, but you're not going back." Nira's small face flickered between relief and suspicion. "Bought me?" she asked, voice trembling. "Like a thing?" Marek's throat tightened. "Not like a thing," he said carefully. You're human enough for me to fight for you. That's all." Her luminous eyes softened, but her hands still clutched at the collar nervously. "I will not. I do not trust easily," she said. "Paper can be torn. Ledger can be rewritten. You promise not to?" "I promise," he interrupted. "I won't let them take you. I'll do whatever I can to protect you." Her face tilted slightly, a small, exhausted smile. Then, "We start." They spent the next hours packing her into the back of his survey truck. He had brought a tarp, some water, field rations, and a med kit. She marveled quietly at each object, fingers brushing along the surfaces as if cataloging everything for memory. "I've never had my own things," she whispered, almost to herself as she touched the med kit. "Always taken, always borrowed. Never mine." Marek's chest tightened. The world she described, a universe of auction blocks, chained collars, and forced labor, was a nightmare he had only ever glimpsed in reports and rumors. Now, he lived it in the tiny, trembling body beside him. As they drove toward the nearest settlement with safe houses, Nira began to tell him her story. Her colony had been on a remote, moon-ringed planet. Her people, Lyrians, were gardeners, healers, songkeepers. They lived in tightly knit clusters, teaching the young to tend biomosses and reef sprouts that produced powerful medicinal salves. Nira had been apprenticed as a healer, learning the slow, careful work of nurturing life. Then the hunters had come. Corporate contractors, mercenaries who snatched children with rare gifts. They had taken her sisters one by one, leaving only rumors of their fates. Nira had been lucky or unlucky to survive. They had brought her to the black markets where she had been sold and resold as a living asset. "Why didn't anyone help you?" Marek asked, voice low. "They did not exist," she said simply. "My people are not strong. Not enough to fight humans who carry power of law, of money, of war." Her eyes shone dimly, though not with tears this time. "I hid, I ran. Until you." Marek kept his eyes on the road. He had never been good with moral clarity. He did not know if he was a savior or a thief, a protector or a participant in the commerce of flesh. But he knew that if he hesitated, she might disappear again. That was the one certainty. The next few days were a blur of travel, safe houses, and low-profile stops. Marek realized quickly that being the owner of a sentient alien child came with unexpected complications. Hunters from the market scouted the edges of towns, brokers called on scrambled frequencies asking after their asset, and the corporate network occasionally pinged through the truck's sensors. Nira had not only survived slavery, she had survived being valuable. Now, every scrap of paper listing her as property was a target. In one tense encounter, Marek parked near an abandoned warehouse to sleep. The drone buzzed low over the truck, its red sensors scanning. Nira had curled up in the corner, watching it with luminous eyes. "They will follow," she whispered. "Even here," Marek nodded. "I know. We just have to be faster." She tilted her head. "Faster than the law?" "Faster than those who abuse it," he said. Slowly, as they traveled, Marek learned that her abilities were subtle, almost imperceptible. She could mend small cuts on his hands with a touch, soothe bruises, and even make plants sprout faster than they should. He had not expected miracles, he had expected fear and exhaustion, but there they were. Small gifts, reminders that she was more than a fragile thing. The more he saw of her, The more he realized that buying her had not freed her. It had merely made her dependent on him for survival in a system that measured her in credits and assets. That realization kept him awake many nights, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he could ever give her something better than temporary safety. One evening, parked on the edge of a cliff overlooking a silver river, Neera spoke suddenly. "Do you know what it feels like to be ledgered?" she asked quietly. "To know your name is a number? I have seen humans do this to each other, and now I am not just me. I am Jabba K-77 in your hands," Marek swallowed. He had not thought about that part: legal ownership, digital ledger, cold verification of life as commodity. I know, he said softly. She looked at him, luminous eyes steady. "Then help me be more than that. Help me be Neera again, not K-77, and do not let them take me." He reached out and touched her shoulder gently. "I will try. I don't know how, but I will try." And in that moment, Marek understood something he had not realized before. Saving her wasn't a single act of mercy. It was a campaign. It would require cunning, bravery, and deception, sometimes legal, sometimes not. It would mean standing against the market, against hunters, against the very ledger that declared she was property. And Marek, the man who had mapped rocks and sand for a living, had no choice but to become her protector in a world designed to destroy her. The first test of that new reality came faster than he expected. One night, a low, persistent hum rattled the truck. A small skimmer drone hovered near the cliff edge, red sensors sweeping. Neera stiffened. "They have found us," she whispered. Marek felt his stomach drop. This was no rumor now, no distant threat. This was the first real proof that the market did not forget, that the ledger did not forgive, and that buying her, making her his property, was only the beginning of a much longer fight. He looked at Neera, her small hands trembling, and for the first time truly understood the stakes. The market didn't deal in mercy. It dealt in life, and for her, survival would mean bending the rules of ownership, law, and human decency. He started the engine, keeping his eyes on the red dot of the drone. "Hold on," he said quietly. "We're going to be very, very hard to find." Neera's luminous eyes reflected the truck's dashboard lights. She nodded slowly. "I trust you," she said. It was not freedom, not yet, but it was the first step toward it, and for now that had to be enough. ChatGPT said, "Here's part 3 of the story, your 2,000 words, continuing the narrative. This part escalates the danger. Hunters close in, Marek and Neera face their first real confrontation, and their bond strengthens as they navigate the threats of the market and the borderlands." The first time Marek realized the market didn't forgive, he felt it in the soles of his boots. They were parked on the edge of a dry wash, hidden among rocky ridges, but the drone had found them anyway. Its red sensors danced across the desert like fireflies, sweeping the truck's metal surfaces, flicking through the tarp covering Neera. She crouched in the back, her small hands folded over her knees, luminous eyes reflecting the crimson glow. "They're coming," she whispered, barely moving her lips. Marek's stomach nodded. He didn't have weapons, not really, just a field scanner and a multi-tool. But he had a plan. Not a proper plan, just a series of desperate calculations. If they wanted her back, they would follow, track, pressure, and when cornered, they wouldn't hesitate to hurt either of them. He started the engine, careful to keep the drone in sight. The little machine hovered closer, its sensors spinning like an accusing eye. He flicked the truck's headlights on briefly, then off. It reacted instantly, adjusting its course. Neera pressed herself into the floor of the cargo area, trembling. "They will try to cut us off," she whispered. "Hunters. Humans who buy humans, or other things." Her voice faltered, then steadied. "They will not hesitate. You must drive faster." "Not because of me. Because of survival." Marek nodded. His mind raced. Safe houses were a few hours away, small dwellings hidden by desert terrain, supported by the network of people who disliked the market but had learned to survive in its shadows. Lena had given him a list, but the distances were vast, and every moment in the open could be fatal. The drone dove toward the truck. Marek swerved sharply, kicking up dust and sand. He heard a metallic ping against the side of the vehicle. Nira screamed, a high, piercing sound. He gritted his teeth. The drone's sensors weren't just passive. They had a weapon, small but precise. "Hold down," he barked, though he didn't know if it would help. "I can't stop now." She pressed herself flat against the floor. Marek could feel the tremor of her fear through the thin metal of the truck bed. It made his stomach twist in helpless fury. They had survived the market, the auction, and the chain, but now they were being hunted like prey, and every mile of open desert counted. Hours passed like that, Marek weaving through canyons, taking back roads, avoiding known patrol zones. At one point, he found a narrow slot canyon and ducked the truck inside. The drone passed overhead, scanning, missing them entirely. Nira exhaled slowly, as if she had forgotten how. "You did good," she whispered, luminous eyes flicking toward him. "You think too fast. Not like humans who hunt for profit, but like survival. You may last." He shook his head. "I just didn't want them to catch you," he admitted. The words tasted hollow. "I still don't know if it will be enough." She tilted her head. "Nothing is ever enough, but it is start." They reached the first safe house as the sun began to rise, a small adobe building tucked against a ridge, barely visible against the ochre stone. Marek knew the owner, a woman who had sheltered escaped assets before. She greeted them with little ceremony but with understanding. "You brought her alive?" she said, examining Nira closely. "That's the first victory. Rest, eat, then we make a plan." Nira stepped inside slowly, looking around. The interior smelled of dust, dried herbs, and antiseptic. She ran her fingers along the walls as if touching the structure might make it part of her new reality. I have not touched walls like this since the market," she whispered. Marek didn't respond. Words felt inadequate. Instead, he set about unloading the supplies, unpacking rations, and trying to find some semblance of normalcy. Nira helped quietly, moving herbs into jars, stacking rations, humming faintly, a song too small to fill the room, but enough to remind them both of the life beyond chains. That night, Marek lay on a cot in the corner, barely sleeping. Every shadow felt like an enemy, every sound of wind like a whisper of the hunters closing in. He knew the market wouldn't give up. Nira's life had value, and humans, hunters, brokers, collectors would stop at nothing to reclaim her. In the early hours, a sound of movement outside broke the fragile calm. Marek tensed immediately. Nira stirred, luminous eyes wide and alert. He moved toward the door, placing his hand on the multi-tool in his belt. 3 figures moved through the courtyard, black-clad, weapons humming softly. They were hunters, sent by brokers who had tracked the transaction. Their boots crunched against gravel. The smallest misstep could trigger an alarm, but they moved with a predator's confidence. Marek froze. He wasn't trained for combat. But he knew something the hunters didn't: the terrain. The safe house's walls were thick adobe. The roof had weak beams. Improvisation could save them. He pulled Nira toward the back exit. "Stay close. Do not make a sound." She followed silently, her small hands clutching his arm. He led her through a narrow side passage and out into a rocky slope. From here, they could climb higher ground and observe the hunters below. "They will look inside," Nira whispered. "Then they will come for us here." "You must be ready." Marek gritted his teeth. "I have no weapons." "What do you expect me to do?" Her luminous eyes softened. "Use what you have. Use your mind." And in that moment, Marek understood that survival in this world did not always rely on firepower. It relied on cunning, improvisation, and a willingness to bend the rules of morality to protect life. He watched the hunters sweep the courtyard, rifles scanning, scanners pinging. One approached the back door. Marek took a deep breath. Using a loose rock and a piece of wire, he rigged a simple trip mechanism, a warning alert that would buy them seconds. The hunter tripped, stumbled, and cursed. The sound echoed. The others swiveled, moving toward the noise. Marek took Nira's hand and ran. Up the slope, over rocky ridges, past dry creek beds where they could hide. She moved quietly, her small body surprisingly fast, as if the trauma had honed her into something stronger than fragile. They reached a cavern that opened onto a ridge overlooking the safe house. Marek's lungs burned. Nira's breathing was soft, steady. Below, the hunters fanned out, scanning, but they hadn't seen them. For now they were safe. "Why did you buy me?" she asked suddenly, luminous eyes fixed on him. "You did not have to. You could have left me to the market." Merrick's throat tightened. "I couldn't," he said simply. "I didn't want to be the kind of man who walks away." Her gaze lingered on him. "I do not fully trust you, but I am learning. Perhaps you are different." They stayed on the ridge until the hunters gave up and withdrew. Marek knew this was temporary. The market would not forget, and the hunters were only the beginning. Brokers would send more drones, more hunters, more eyes. Over the next few days, Marek and Nira learned to move quickly, taking hidden paths, sleeping in caves, and relying on the network Lena had helped him establish. Nira shared more of her history, her training as a healer, her lost sisters, the ways her species communicated subtly through light and hums and touch. Marek discovered that her abilities were not just physical, they were deeply instinctual. She could sense faint vibrations in the earth, detect the pulse of plants, even feel the lingering echo of emotions in people she touched. It was extraordinary but also dangerous. Those same abilities had made her valuable to the market, and that value was the very thing that threatened her life. One evening as they rested in a hidden alcove, Marek asked, "Do you want freedom, Nira?" She considered the question, luminous eyes reflecting the dying light of the sunset. "Freedom is complicated," she said finally. "I am free only if I am alive. The rest is a dream for another time. Right now I want safety. I want life, and I want someone who will stand with me against the hunters." Marek nodded. "Then we'll fight together." It was not the fight he had imagined when he had first cut the chain tethering her to the desert floor. It was larger, uglier, and infinitely more dangerous. The market didn't care about mercy, only profit. And in that world, a sentient alien child with healing powers was priceless. They trained in the shadows, Marek improvising defenses, Nira learning to use her abilities in subtle ways to sense danger, heal minor injuries, and conserve energy. Each day brought new threats, new calculations, and the constant awareness that one mistake could cost everything. And yet, through it all, a bond formed. It was not simple, not entirely safe, and certainly not free from fear, but it was real. They depended on each other, trusted each other, and slowly, Nira began to feel like more than an asset, and Marek began to feel like more than a man who simply walked through the desert. The hunters had not given up. The market had not forgotten. But for now, on a ridge overlooking the desert below, with the first stars appearing, Marek and Nira were alive. And in that precarious, dangerous survival, they found a small, stubborn thread of hope. ChatGPT said, "Here's part 4, the climactic conclusion, 2,000 words, wrapping up Marek and Nira's story with danger, resolution, and the final steps toward her freedom." The desert was quiet that night, almost too quiet, and Marek knew it was a warning. He had learned to read the silence of the borderlands. No wind, no distant engines, no stray animals. It meant predators were near, not in body, but in intent. Nira sat beside him in the truck, small and tense, luminous eyes reflecting the moonlight. "They will come," she whispered, almost too quietly to hear. "Hunters, brokers, they will not stop. Not until the ledger is repaid or my body is returned." Marek nodded. He tightened his grip on the wheel. "I know, but this ends tonight." The plan was dangerous, reckless, and almost certainly illegal. They would leave the safety of hidden caves, lure the hunters into a canyon, and use Nira's abilities to create a defensive advantage while he hacked the market's communications to scramble the trackers. The stakes were enormous. Failure meant capture or worse. As they moved, the shadows along the canyon walls shifted. Figures, tall and black-clad, emerged, rifles glinting in the moonlight. Hunters, the ones who had chased them relentlessly for weeks. Marek felt a surge of adrenaline. Nira's hands glowed faintly as she touched the soil, sensing vibrations, the faintest pulse of life around them. "They will fall where I can guide them," she murmured. Marek nodded, unsure of exactly what she meant, but trusting her instincts. They had survived this long because of her. The first hunter stepped forward, rifle raised. Marek yanked the truck to the side, kicking up dust and rock. Nira's glow intensified, a pale, radiant shimmer that seemed to make the canyon walls bend in light. The hunter froze, momentarily distracted by the strange, ethereal illumination. Marek ducked behind the truck bed, fists clenching. He had no weapons, only the tools of his trade and whatever improvisation he could muster. Nira's light pulsed. A rhythmic pattern he realized was defensive, almost like a warning. The hunters moved closer, but the ground under them trembled slightly, sending loose stones rolling. Nira's ability to sense vibrations was more than instinct. It could manipulate the environment subtly. "They do not know me," she whispered. "They see only asset, K-77. They underestimate the living." The first hunter fired, a bright streak cutting through the shadows. Marek grabbed Nira, pulling her behind the truck as a rock splintered near them. She touched his arm, sending warmth and a strange, calming pulse through his body. The bruises from weeks of travel and fear seemed to ease under her touch. "Go!" she hissed. "I will make them hesitate. Trust me!" Marek's heart raced as he sprinted toward the canyon exit. Behind him, Nira moved like a wraith, her glow expanding, the light bending around her as if the night itself were shielding her. The hunters fired blindly, their red sensors struggling against the strange illumination. One by one, they tripped over shifted rocks, startled by the subtle tremors of the ground. When they reached the canyon's mouth, Marek pulled the truck into a narrow passage, jamming the vehicle's weight against jagged rock to block pursuit. He turned to see Nira standing alone, small but radiant, facing the hunters. They hesitated. Something about her, her glow, the strange rhythm of her pulse, made them falter. "You are not theirs!" Marek shouted, though his voice was drowned in the desert wind. "Leave now!" The hunters hesitated longer, confusion flickering across their masked faces. And then Nira released a wave of energy, subtle but undeniable, that pulsed outward from her chest. It was not destructive, not violent, but it made the hunters stagger, their weapons shaking in their hands. The desert seemed to ripple under the effect, as if the canyon itself recognized her presence. Marek felt a rush of pride and fear. She was more than an asset. She was a force of nature. When the hunters finally retreated, scrambling for their vehicles, Marek ran to her. Nira's glow dimmed, her shoulders sagging in relief. He touched her arm gently. "You did it," he said, voice raw. "They're gone." She looked at him, luminous eyes steady. "They will come again." "Others will come, but not tonight. Tonight I am not K-77, I am Nira." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Marek realized that the ledger, the paper, the contracts, none of it truly defined her. Her life was her own now, not because of law, but because of courage, trust, and survival. The next morning, they returned to the safe house. Marek knew they couldn't linger. The market would notice any anomaly in its system, but they needed to sever the last tangible chain, the collar. Nira held it in her hands, the metal cold, the circuitry faintly glowing. She looked at Marek. "This was never mine," she said softly. "It marked me as property, but it cannot define me." Marek hesitated. He had grown attached to the token in the ledger, the proof that he had taken responsibility. But he understood, keeping it now would tie her to a past she no longer needed to bear. He took a tool, and together they worked to break the collar. Sparks flew and the metal twisted and curled. When it cracked finally, Nira dropped it to the ground. "It is gone," she whispered. "Not because the market cares. Not because law intervened. Because I am more than their chains." Marek felt a lump in his throat. The ledger in his pocket still had his name as the owner, but it no longer had the power it once did. They had survived the hunters, evaded the market, and reclaimed something deeper: agency. In the days that followed, Marek helped Nira connect with advocates who specialized in alien rights and sentience recognition. Legal battles were messy, slow, and often infuriating, but the injunction they received ensured that she could not be traded again. The world was still dangerous, still corrupt, but she had a protective shield stronger than any chain or ledger: recognition as a living, autonomous being. Nira began to teach, to heal, to reclaim her identity. She showed other rescued Lyrians how to read the desert, how to sense the pulse of plants, how to defend themselves using subtle gifts. Marek worked alongside her, no longer just protector, but partner in survival, in rebuilding, in resistance. One evening, they sat together on a ridge overlooking the desert, now calm under the golden sunset. Nira hummed a song, quiet, beautiful, carrying the cadence of her homeworld. Marek listened, understanding that the small victories, survival, safety, trust, were the true measure of freedom. "You will leave one day," he said softly. Nira's luminous eyes met his. "Perhaps. But today we stay alive. Tomorrow, maybe I teach. Maybe I heal. Maybe the market learns that some lives cannot be bought." Marek nodded. He did not need to ask if she would trust him again. They had survived the chains, the hunters, and the ledger. Now the world was theirs to navigate together, fragile and dangerous as it was. For the first time in a long while, Marek felt something like hope. It was not absolute. The desert was still full of predators. The market still had reach. But for Nira, for him, for the fragile thread of trust they had built, survival was victory. And in the small, stubborn light of the desert sunset, with her luminous hands brushing over sprouting herbs in a small garden, Marek realized the truth. Buying her had been only the first step. Freedom was fragile, survival was deliberate, and trust was the thing worth more than any ledger, more than any chain, more than any market. She was Nira now, and she would live.